So hello everyone again. I'm just here to greet you and to ask you to turn off your audio and video so we can hear our colleague, Dr. Ivana Medić from the Institute of Musicology, moderate the session, actually the book presentation of the collective monograph Made in Yugoslavia, Studies in Popular Music, published this year. She will speak with one of the editors, Dr. Danijela Špirić, and two of the contributors, Marko, Zubak, and Jelka Vukobratović. So I will turn off my microphone as well. So here you go.
Now you join the audience.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure and great honor to welcome you all to this fantastic book launch. It's the book called Made in Yugoslavia. It was published a few months ago by Routledge within their series Routledge Global Popular Music, which already comprises, I don't know, maybe about 20 books. Let me see how many. No, less, about 10. So we have Made in France, Made in the Low Countries, Made in Turkey, Made in Australia and New Zealand, Made in Greece, Made in Taiwan, Made in Poland, Made in Hong Kong, and Made in Yugoslavia. So it's a fantastic series because it enables specifically Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American readers to become more familiar with the popular musics from all over the world. Because the global music industry, from the Anglo-Saxon point of view and American point of view, it is very Anglophone, but actually it is not the case. So many other parts of the world actually have very developed recording industries, huge music stars, film industry, which is also attached to the music industry. So this book series actually offers this diversity and shows, yes, we all know about the Beatles, you know, and the Rolling Stones and Ed Sheeran today and Taylor Swift, but actually there exist many, many, many other popular musics all over the world, which all of you should get familiar with. So as Bojana has said, we now have one of the editors of this fantastic book, Danijela Špirić, who is based in Cardiff, although she is originally from Bosnia. Actually, both she and I were born in Yugoslavia. We still have that, I think, in our birth certificates, the country that no longer exists. So for us, at least this was part of this nostalgia for the long-lost country when we signed up to do this project. Danijela has recently completed several important projects aside from this book that she has edited with Jelka Rasmussen from the United States, also originally from Bosnia. Danijela has also co-edited a special issue of the journal 20th Century Music. It is one of the journals published by Cambridge University Press, and it deals with music and socialism. She might also want to say a few words about that later. We also have two contributors to this book. We have Marko Zubak, who is a historian, and he is a research associate at the Historian Institute and Croatian Institute of History. And we have Jelka Vukobratović, who has recently completed her PhD in ethnomusicology in Austria. And she is actually based as, she works as an assistant at the Music Academy in Zagreb. So welcome everyone to this online book launch. And first I would like to ask Danijela to tell us a bit about the idea behind this book. How did you team up with Jelka Rasmussen? How long did it take from the initial idea to the published book? How many years? How many tears? How many, you know, setbacks in the process? How did you select contributors to this volume? Did everyone who you wanted to sign up to this, did they all agree? So tell us a bit about that.
First, let me just quickly thank you for having me, and thank you for including this as part of your conference. I'm very pleased to be able to say a little bit about the book, especially given these very strange times that we all find ourselves in. Yeah, so the project started really quite some time ago, and it's both, it feels important to say when, but also it's not maybe fully realistic. So a colleague of mine here at Cardiff, who'll be soon leaving and going to Oxford, Sarah Hill, who is a popular music specialist, came to me and said, why don't you do something like this? There's a fantastic series, Routledge Global Popular Music Series. They deal with different countries, and you should do something on either former Yugoslavia or the Balkans, you know. And there it was from the start. What are we dealing with? You know, we don't have the country anymore per se. We have this cultural legacy, but we still have the region that produced things. And like you mentioned, you know, people literally like us who were made in Yugoslavia, you know. So I thought, oh, that's both exciting. And also it was at a time when I'd finished my PhD and I'd worked for a while at Nottingham. And I think my PhD was on Josip Slavensky, which, although working on the composer within the region, it was a very different can of worms, you know. So working on serious music, but I'd always been interested in popular music and film music. So I thought, this sounds like it could be challenging, because immediately, you know, she doesn't know how to say it. She's saying either Yugoslavia or Western Balkans or something on the Balkans. So we have that issue that we all have to negotiate and think about. But at the same time, that would be a great thing. So I contacted the series editors, who were, by the way, fantastic. Goffredo Plastino and Franco Fabri, two Italians, and they were keen to do this. Initially, it had a slightly different, you know, I thought of people that I'd like to bring on the project. Initially, Jelka was one of the authors, not a co-editor. And then as the project evolved and I communicated with people, I realized that I actually wanted to work with somebody because I was younger myself, and also this was new for me. I wanted somebody with a bit more experience, and I wanted somebody from a different discipline. So she's an ethnomusicologist. Yeah. I was a straight, I would say, die-hard musicologist, but that was my training. So I wanted us both to come from different disciplines to a, if you like, a third discipline, popular music studies.
So just to add, the thing is, like, popular music studies, it still, although it's such a diverse discipline nowadays, but we still don't know who is actually in charge of it. Is it musicology? Is it ethnomusicology? Cultural studies? Why don't we have like a new essentialization, a new specialism devoted to this discipline?
Yeah, so it was great to have immediately from the outset this cross-disciplinary, if you like, specialism background, but to go into this, if you like, third pool that we were forging with, bringing our experience. It was fantastic to bring her on board. I'm so fortunate that she, you know, accepted, because obviously she'd worked on the Componovana music, and we'd all known her from that. But actually she had vast experience being part of this scene as a young girl, a student, and working in Sarajevo. So she'd worked with some fantastic people, you know, and her husband worked with Indexy, you know, the kind of the big stars, and she'd worked in different institutions. So this was great. So yeah, I was very pleased to be able to realize that project. So she came on a little bit later, and the project had evolved a little bit. We had the first sort of peer review of our proposal, which was accepted, subject to a few changes. In that process of working out authors, she brought a few other people on, some initial people. And this is what happens, you know, you have your ideal team, you contact your ideal authors, you hope they will say yes. Then with some of them, you have to work a bit harder. Some of them becomes frustrating, and some simply disappear. Yeah. From the planet Earth, or certainly from your inbox, you know. So this is one of those things that, you know, I think what I learned is you can have your perfect vision, but if you're working with other people, not just with other people, any type of research, you know, you can have your perfect vision, you go into archives and you come back and you think, I have to rethink this, you know. So this is just generally how things are. But yeah, so just, I'll finish off just with Jelka. So she came on a bit later, and then we started working, and we pretty much devised then together the book. I don't want to say as it is, but the authors and the topics, and on the whole, you know, what we needed to do, or certainly the more general idea, striking a balance between finding something that obviously was tailored predominantly as a textbook for Anglophone readership, so really for British and American universities. Yeah. So the difficulty of, not just for us, I guess it's the same for any other country that's non-English speaking, we have this music that we need to talk about, but these people don't know this music. So you have, you know, and we all deal with this all the time, you know, anything from translating lyrics, explaining cultural codes, but also without making it too simple and too basic. You know, so striking a balance between introducing, contextualizing this, but also engaging critically with this material to allow our authors for their voices and their scholarship.
So it doesn't turn out like Yugoslav music for the dummies.
Exactly, exactly. And we really didn't want it to be that, but at the same time, it had to do a lot of things, you know. So in that sense,
I guess Marko and Jelka will also confirm this, that it is very different when we write something for domestic readership, because we assume that they know a lot of things already. But when writing for an international readership, we have to really describe the basics. And very often make these sort of introduction to literature. We have to, you know, name the names of important scholars who we take for granted, but they've never heard of. So it kind of uses up part of the article, you know, just having to explain these things that in normal circumstances we wouldn't be explaining at all. We would just be, you know, starting directly from the topic. So before you continue, I would just like to ask Jelka and then Marko as well, how did Danijela and Jelka recruit you for this project? How did they find you? Did you already know each other before you signed up to do this? And what was your motivation for joining this project? Jelka.
Thank you. Hi everyone. First of all, I think it is important to say that my contribution was co-authored with Naila Ceribasic. So she was the one who was contacted by Danijela and Jelka. And at the time, I was starting to, I was elected for a teaching assistant at the Music Academy, and since Naila Ceribasic and I already, we knew each other and we knew our interests, and she was my mentor for both my PhD and my master thesis. So Naila Ceribasic was the one who asked me, would I like to write a co-authored chapter for this book? And I was, of course, interested for several reasons, because it was the opportunity to work with such an editorial board and in such a prestigious series, and with Naila Ceribasic. And it was also a topic that I was interested in. And Professor Ceribasic already had an idea what she would like to do, and so together we developed our topic and our research on the application of popular music in the Youth Day ceremonies. Mm-hmm. And of course,
are you old enough to remember the Youth Day ceremonies?
How old are you? Wanted to comment. I was born in '94. So my perspective, still in Yugoslavia, but my perspective
you were a very little girl when...
Yes, was quite different, and it was, as you said, it was difficult to manage because of the because we were limited in space. So the chapters are relatively small, especially when you work with someone. So the two of us had to put all of our thoughts into this small space and include all of these historical background and explain to people what the Youth Day ceremonies were. But it was also helpful for me because I only had like general knowledge about the Youth Day, since I was born in '84 and the last Youth Day ceremony was held in '87. And it is also helpful. It continued to be helpful for me because now I include a lecture about the Youth Day ceremonies in our classes on popular music on the Music Academy, and it's very helpful to have this knowledge of historical background, because our students of course have no idea what the Youth Day ceremonies are, so you have to explain from the start to give them this perspective.
Marko wrote about a very interesting and neglected topic even in our popular studies, which is Yugoslav disco. Disco was one of the genres of popular music which was kind of neglected by rock critics, pop music critics, all those people who created the mythologies surrounding Yugoslav pop cultures. Because I guess, especially rock journalists, those who were in charge of these big magazines such as Jukebox and so on, they all wanted to mythologize their stars. And then they completely failed to realize the importance of disco when it first emerged as a very inclusive sort of cultural subculture within Yugoslav popular space. And perhaps, as Marko has shown, now it's the time to reassess the contribution of disco to the opening of Yugoslavia and the whole of this cultural space in so many ways. So would you like to tell us how they recruited you and how you set out to write your chapter?
Thank you, Ivana. You just perfectly elaborated my reasons why I tackled this, because this is precisely what you just said. It's this, and you were very polite. It was not only neglect, it was more of a despise of this whole thing. And it was at that era, which I don't think exists anymore, it was this binary view of what is accepted, what is cool music, and what is not, and disco was on the other side. So I'm actually, I think, even here in this context as well, but definitely probably when I reached Danijela, and I will say how this came about, was a bit of an outsider because I'm a historian and not a musicologist. And to come back what you said in the introduction, who this field of popular music belongs to. In Britain, where there is a long tradition of this, now it's more clear who does it belong to. But one of the reasons why I as a cultural historian, 20th century Yugoslavia, interested in popular culture, media, kind of tackled music, was precisely because I saw there is so much opportunity there. And I think there will be for a long time, because the material is so rich. So I was approached actually by Ana Petrov, who probably you know, a Belgrade musicologist whom I met through these Yugoslav conferences, and she knew that I was making an exhibition about the Yugoslav disco, and then I was kind of going into that direction. And she then said, you know, there is this great volume coming about, edited by Danijela. And I think when I approached Danijela, it was just the time when Jelka was also already in the project. And then I just wrote them and said, you know, this is something that I'm really interested. I would be willing to write. I had some other ideas as well, and then luckily enough, I was accepted by the editor. So this is my path to this.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean that you took this proactive approach, because it really enriched the volume with this added perspective. Oh, sorry, I need to decline. I thought I had switched off the phone. Just give me a second. Sorry about that. Stupid iPhones. Yeah, it's dead now. Okay, let's go back to the table of contents of this book. because I would like now Danijela to tell us a bit about the way they structured the book. Obviously, it was, Bojana, could you please share the table of contents? So obviously, they realized probably very early on that there exist several important strands of Yugoslav popular music. So the first one was Zabavna, entertainment music, which was pop, but not just pop, but also Schlager, many other types of entertainment, light entertainment music, which was mainly aimed at urban audiences. Then we have rock, punk, new wave, which started out as underground genre, but then eventually rock even reached the mainstream status in the 1980s. Then we have the most commercially successful and the most notorious part of Yugoslav popular culture, which is Narodna, folk music, and Neofolk. Danijela has mentioned novokomponovana narodna muzika, which is Jelka's specialism, among other things. So this was actually popular music, which was aimed more at not so urban audiences, but also at diaspora communities and many other strands of Yugoslav society. And then we have the fourth part of the book, the politics of popular music under socialism, which includes all these other side things that were part of this, such as the Eurovision Song Contest, festivals of patriotic and revolutionary songs, socialist entrepreneurship, then also what Jelka has talked about, these big mass spectacles organized on the occasion of Tito's birthday, and then also Slovenian punk as a subculture in Yugoslavia. And it is also very helpful, which is not seen in this table of content, that all of these parts of the book are introduced by the editors. So they not only have the big introduction, reclaiming the legacy of Yugoslav popular music, but also each of these sections of the book is announced by a short 2 or 3 pages introduction where the editors explain what it is all about and what a lay reader, someone who has no clue about Yugoslav pop music, what they can expect. So I would now like to ask Danijela, how did you decide for this particular order? Why start with Zabavna muzika? How did you group these articles? Because, for example, this one on Slovenian punk, perhaps it could have also belonged to the rock music section. So why was it important for you to highlight the subcultural aspect of it and so on?
Yeah, good question. So initially when we put the proposal together, so there was the first proposal, and based on that, we got the contract. I remember there was sort of, let's say, loose streams. We had some idea that somehow there had to be some kind of thematic units, you know, and looking through other volumes, and I think at the time maybe there were only about 4 published other volumes, so we didn't have huge repository to compare and go by. That was made in Italy, Spain, France wasn't out then, maybe it was Sweden, oddly, and perhaps one of the
Low countries, the Netherlands.
Yeah, it was very strange. So we looked through those and we realized, you know, and obviously we wanted, because it's part of a series, it needs to have certain consistency with other volumes. But at the same time, because we are all dealing with our specific contexts, you can't just simply go and copy and follow, you know, a template. So in a way, it had certain template, but you had to also create one yourself. So we knew roughly that we wanted to have these several streams. And we knew, I think initially we thought maybe Zabavna and rock music could be one larger stream or a thematic unit. Narodna, or novokomponovana, was going to be another, and some aspect of music and politics was most likely going to be third. I think partly because mine and several other chapters dealt with it, but also we thought it's such a huge topic really when thinking, you know, and generally thinking about popular music studies, it's very difficult to talk about them in any volumes without addressing, you know, politics. And I don't mean just capital, but politics with a small p. So I was quite keen to include, to talk about this relationship with novokomponovana music, which is something specific, not just to Yugoslavia, but to other Balkan countries, but it's something that we don't find in the West. So how do we translate this? And also I remember, you know, there were so many things growing up, this idea of, you know, Zabavnjaci, Narodnjaci, and this very complex and at times derogatory relationship, you know, that. So I said to Jelka, we need to bring this on. So it wasn't, you know, one might think that it was her drive, but we both agreed certainly, but we wanted to make sure to give, you know, because I think any other accounts on popular music broadly always tended to exclude Narodna novokomponovana or to deal with it elsewhere. So there was this sense of Zabavna popular mainstream, which is the sort of light, cleaner, and then rock usually as the, you know, subcultural force. Mm-hmm. So we really wanted to think about relationships between those and to see, you know, is there anything else in each one of these streams? But I guess to thinking of popular music, what it might have been in former Yugoslavia, and all the constituent parts. And I think those constituent parts are, roughly speaking, the four themes. There might be other smaller ones, but we wanted to make sure to have certain conversation between those, but also to allow them all equal space, you know, mm-hmm. that they can all talk about, you know, the whole of Yugoslav popular music. Mm-hmm. And over time, getting different chapters, getting different authors on board, some dropped out, some for various reasons it didn't work out. And then I think for some authors also what they might have thought their chapter would have been to start with, they changed a lot during the working process, mm-hmm. feedback, research. So we just fine-tuned those, but we didn't sort of stipulate anything to start with. We just had some rough idea, but we didn't say, oh, those chapters and those authors would go into those sections. So, mm-hmm. you know, we had some kind of rough idea. We allowed things to work out organically. We allowed our authors, you know, we were working with them. And this was very difficult as well, trying to find a balance between asking them constantly to do stuff for us, which we felt needed to be there for our mm-hmm. Anglophone readership, but at the same time making enough compromise to still for our authors to feel like they own their texts. That was the very difficult thing, and we wanted to do that.
You know. A very good introduction to ask all four of us actually to comment on the editorial process, because I think this is very relevant for young musicologists who perhaps haven't contributed to volumes of this kind, you know, or collaborated with major journals yet. So I think it would be very helpful for them to demystify the process of writing a book chapter of this kind. I will start by confessing that my own chapter, which deals with music videos in Yugoslavia, underwent at least 3 major revisions. Why? Because when I first plunged into this topic, music videos in Yugoslavia, oh my God, where to start? Because this is such a big thing, and it is inevitably tied to the development of television broadcasting in Yugoslavia. So I felt that I had to provide a background story about the development of television and these different types of programming aimed at young people, starting first from the specific republics and then spreading out to the entire Yugoslav space. While at the same time, you know, the number of television sets in the country started increasing. So as I quote, by 1965, television sets were selling better than heaters and vacuum cleaners in Yugoslavia. So television was a really big thing for the country. But then it turned out that my emphasis on this development of television actually took up too much space. It didn't leave me enough room to actually talk about the chosen artists. And I think we very quickly came to the agreement that we would like to include Josipa Lisac as a very striking female figure, we wanted Ekaterina Velika as one of these bands who went from an underground attraction to a mainstream act towards the end of the 90s, while preserving their mystique and these kind of credentials among the rock critics. And then we took also Rambo Amadeus as this resident jester, who was there to satirize and parody old stereotypes about the Balkans and the Balkan folk and pop cultures. So yeah, that took a lot of tweaking, you know, just how much information to include, how much information to exclude, what goes into the footnotes, what goes into the main text. And it really took some effort, both from me and the editors, until we reached the final version. And this is not something to be ashamed about or try to hide. This is actually how things should be done. So the author always has to work closely with editors of these big books, because the editors also have to satisfy the expectations of the publishing house, who wants to sell the book and who also has a specific target readership when conceiving a certain series. So that's a multi-level process that needs negotiation at each stage of the process.
And also, sorry, just to say, absolutely correct. And not just at that level, but when it's a multi-edited volume, so we have over 20 authors, you know, when you're working with individual author, so you will have an abstract and you'll have individual chapter, we are the ones who can see the bigger picture. So we know what's covered in other chapters. Yeah, absolutely. So it's also trying to find a way, oh, actually, we've got this already covered. So if we take this out, or if we minimize this here, because we feel the whole book is there, but it's very hard as well, you know, for us to you have to work sensitively with each author, because somebody, you know, some people are quite relaxed and say, yeah, sure, let's hack, let's move, let's do this. And others who quite understandably might have worked very long time on something might feel more protective over those aspects. So you have to also do quite a bit of nuancing and to and froing and working simultaneously with different people and seeing what can we take out, because that's quite right. I think Jelka mentioned word limit was a big thing, and we wanted more authors, you know, because we really wanted to be inclusive, but that meant shorter word limits, you know. So sorry, that's all I wanted to say.
That's the main thing, And now maybe Marko and Jelka can share their experiences as well with us. Jelka, would you like to comment on your collaboration with your co-author and then with editors? So we had two pairs of ladies working on that chapter.
Yes, so it was quite a challenge, and I also have to admit, if this is a time for confessions, that in the first version, we sent the editors an article which was twice the length of what it should be.
Like that. You weren't the only ones. It's okay.
Sorry.
You weren't the only ones.
Sorry, it was perhaps hard to find a balance also between the two of us. So who will stop at one point, at which point? So in the beginning, it was like the too long of a version, and so first the editors had to choose which parts would be left out, and then we shortened it quite radically. And I also wanted to comment shortly on one other aspect. When you were mentioning that there were different hierarchies between the popular music genres in ex-Yugoslavia, and that it is perhaps Zabavna or even more prominently rock music that is at the top of this hierarchy. It is because of that, it is perhaps easier to write about rock musicians and interview rock musicians. But on the other hand, they are very sensitive about their connection to the socialist Yugoslavia, and you have to be very careful and to balance this discourse very carefully. And Danijela knows this. We actually had to withdraw an interview with one musician whom I cannot mention because we withdrew the interview, specifically because of that. So since our article was, our chapter was about the usage of popular music and musicians within this really state dictated and state choreographed ceremony, this person was very sensitive about the ways that he would be represented, and in the interview he was very open about this. But when he saw the transcript and when he saw how this makes him look, he decided to withdraw it completely. So this was also a learning process for me.
Yeah,
I wasn't aware of this problem during the interview, but only later. And I want to thank Danijela again, because they were very helpful, and they were really supportive, realizing that we had this problem, and helped us in articulating the chapter without this interview.
Yeah. I suppose that wasn't the only case of people trying to self-censor their biographies. Perhaps yes. Danijela also encountered that when writing her own chapter.
Yeah. I mean, I found it deeply frustrating because I had really hoped to talk more, to certain people, but the same thing, I reached out to so many people and tried so many contacts, and it's still a very difficult thing, and I still don't understand it. I think on the whole, the musicians are not ashamed of having worked in that system and having negotiated whatever they need to negotiate,
Yeah,
in
and
order
having
to
become
work.
big stars in that system.
Yeah, and I think on the whole, and it's okay, they can change their minds, that's fine. We all do that, but it was very frustrating. I couldn't, or what I felt I could, so I was very lucky with my own chapter, I think, because in the end I relied the most on some archival information, because when and this started a really long time ago, even before the project. I gave a conference, and actually I gave a paper with Naila. We both gave a paper at Vienna, I think maybe 2014, and it was the seeds of my chapter. And I think she talked about Youth Day project, and since then I think, Jelka, you were really very kind. Basically, I think I pestered Naila to the point until she said, okay, I'll do this just because you're asking so much, but I really had to twist her arm, to do it. And I'm glad I did, because I love the chapter and I think you did a fantastic job. But yeah, so this is always a problem, I felt throughout, I just want to talk to people, and then I had some contacts, and especially with one of my case studies, again, I won't give details, and we had all these arrangements, and I even traveled to different cities in former Yugoslavia, I thought this was going to happen, and then, suddenly these people change their mind, and they don't want to talk, they talk, and then you have to do this. So this is just nature of, I guess it's no different than working with, classical composers,
yes.
And they can be just
still alive.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's easier when they're dead. I'm not saying that I want them all gone. Yeah. Or for me, with my chapter, it was great actually that once I discovered this festival and discovered there was this fantastic archive, I could go into the archive and look at this and thought, well, you may not like it, but I've got stuff here, I'm going to use it, So in that sense, it was fantastic. But without that, I think I would have lacked a lot of depth, or I would have to really, I think, I don't know, really clench on those. Yeah.
Now we need to ask Marko about his writing process. Did you find it difficult to have to make this additional description, because you were not just counting on an ignorant Anglo-American reader, but even here within this former Yugoslav space, we know very little about Yugoslav disco. I remember having a few records of Bonnie M and I don't know, some local disco stars, but that's it, and for me, that chapter was a true revelation, really. So how did you balance the necessity to provide too much detail and not leave your readers in the fog?
Thanks. Well, actually, I think it even it was even a bit easier this way for me, because I didn't have to everyone so for instance, if someone writes about Narodna music, then you have to like explain the context. So when I was writing my thing, I actually had a Yugoslav reader in my mind, because I knew that this is totally against dominant narrative. And for the global readers, I just wanted them to see that it's kind of quirky. The whole thing is that it's not, it is this, but it cannot be seen as disco, as the mainstream disco. When I started to write my chapter, I was already kind of into the topic, and I kind of knew what I wanted to say. And I think, I'm afraid, Danijela might attest to that, I was in the group that was a bit protective of what I wanted to say. But I also, on the other hand, and this is, we probably didn't mention that, I think we didn't mention that, I think like the challenge before Jelka and Danijela was quite a big one, because this is certainly going to be a kind of canon book, because there is not a lot of books about Yugoslav popular music. And then since so much ground is covered here, I really appreciate like the editorial balances and editorial work that I had to do. In the meantime, I came what's the right term? So I became an editor of a music edition for Belgrade, and I have to deal with the exact same kind of like
being on the other side.
Exactly. So I knew a kind of anticipated the problems, but I'm totally appreciate more this kind of negotiation tactics. And we even I'm co-editing this actually, so we even kind of developed this bad cop, good cop routine when approaching someone. And then you sometimes you see that a certain author better reacts to someone, to one editor, to the other. So there's a lot of things. And the final thing, first about the interviews. So again, I was lucky enough, because my kind of ambition is to do this revalorization. So people whom I approached when I spoke, when I interviewed Jogani, when I interviewed Mirza Aliagic, they were all totally happy that, oh, so we are not only trash or we are doing something that kind of meant. So I had a great response, not only from that, but from the more or less all of the people that I asked. And actually, I wanted just to say something. Yeah, okay, it slipped my mind. I'll come back to the final point.
Yeah. You can tell later. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes left. So I would like now to show again the list of contributors, and maybe Bona can later also show us the table of contents again. What is striking here, that about 85% of contributors actually come from the academic sphere. We might be historians, musicologists, ethnomusicologists, but lots of us are actually outsiders, or maybe not outsiders, but, objective scientists who try to dissect a certain cultural phenomenon, such as certain types of popular music. While on the other hand, we have people like Aleksandar Žikić, one of the best rock music journalists from Yugoslavia. We have someone like Vesna Andrej Zajmović, who did this very extensive interview with Goran Bregović, which is one of the final sections of this book. Branko Kostelnik. So not too many people who were actually insiders and protagonists of the scenes, but they still, some of them are still included. And even more so, the work of these major figures such as Dražen Vrdoljak, Ivan Ivačković, Dušan Vesić, so on and so forth, it is referenced throughout the book. So we didn't have such a big pool of academic writings to draw from, but we referenced a lot of rock music journalism, lots of these popular magazines, that sort of, shall I say, non-scientific literature. So a question for Danijela, was it like your original decision to have this type of contributors to the book, or did you perhaps aim for a bit more diversity and inclusivity at the initial draft, but then simply filtered out some people who did not deliver?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to be inclusive to start with. And what I was very keen to do was to really show cross-generational and cross-disciplinary perspectives to as much of a degree as possible. In that sense, it was great for Jelka and I because we are from different generational backgrounds, different experiences of music, popular music in former Yugoslavia. I mean, I'll give you an example. Hers was probably working as somebody who was studying and involved in different organizations and institutions in Sarajevo, and then going as an ethnomusicology PhD student to the States during the war. I came across a lot of this music actually as a child living through I say a child, it wasn't really a child, but a teenager living throughout the war. So I knew a lot of that stuff, but actually it was really when we were hiding from shelling and grenades, you know, when this music making was happening, that I really became familiar with a lot of what is the canon of this music. So our backgrounds were so different. And I came as I want to say a hardcore musicologist, you know, but quite often Jelka would have to keep me in check and say, okay, can you please take off your, you know, musicological hat off? Because, you know, at some point you have to stop asking for analysis and for things. And this is, you know, professional defamation. This is what we do, you know. And I had to find the balance for myself. You know, how do I move into the arena of popular music studies and maybe just relax a little, you know. But we certainly wanted to have, you know, different perspectives from people who were practitioners. So, like you said, there is Branko Kostelnik, who was in a band, and is an artist, was part of that scene in the late 80s. Gregor Tomc, who was part of Pankrti, but also a sociologist and a professor now. So somebody who can deal with academic stuff, but also has the first-hand knowledge. And like you say, Žikić and so on. So I wanted to strike the balance between that and also have younger scholars, you know, from the region really. And this was a great thing about the series. So the condition of the series is that all but one authors have to be from the region or a specific country that it deals with. So our one non-Yugoslav person was Catherine Baker, and she did a fantastic coda, sort of giving us an external perspective.
This is her research area. She teaches actually, is it Balkan studies or something at in the UK.
That's right, yeah. But I was very keen actually to use this as an opportunity. I don't want to say to help out younger authors, but to bring them on the scene, you know, scholars, and to give them this inroad. I mean, I'm sure they would have inroads other way, but it felt like it was an opportunity to have fair few authors and give them a voice and just give them a platform. It might not be the platform, but it, you know, by having something that's meant to be a university textbook, it's pretty nice platform, you know, to allow them to cover. So we were really keen to do that, and I'm very good. And also we wanted to have also cross-regional, I don't want to say strike the balance between equality, you know, and diversity, but we tried to do this very hard, and it's unfortunately we couldn't have, it didn't work out to have anybody covering Kosovo. We tried very hard. With Bosnia it was slightly different, but of course, you know, we didn't also want it to become this thing where we want to have, you know, certain areas just for the sake of it. It had to also be something to find the right people, so not to have sort of positive discrimination just for the sake of equality and diversity. But we wanted to have voices, you know, and different, not necessarily just musicologists or people dealing with music, but to try to work. And that was sometimes more challenging, sometimes not, but it's all about creative balances. And it was a great learning process for us as well, for me in particular.
Also, did you have this sort of awareness? Okay, so I'm writing a book that's going to be a canon kind of thing. So it brings out an additional responsibility, you know, to do it right. But then also when, as soon as you wrap it up, you're already aware of how much is left out. So have you also planned some sort of sequels to this book, or maybe additional, you know, like edited journal special issues or something? And also, do you hope that this book will reignite interest in studying Yugoslavia? Because I guess for many contributors, you know, dealing with the country that we lost is painful in one way or another. you know, having to revisit maybe some memories that we wouldn't want to remember, especially for you and for Jelka, having had the experience that you've had, but also for the rest of us. Bojana here, she was born in Osijek, and then she came to Serbia as a baby, as a child. So we all sort of have a different type of response to the legacy of Yugoslavia and what could have been. So how do you foresee that this field of Yugoslav music studies and popular studies will develop in the future? Does it have a future at all?
Yeah, and I always think, how much should I say? But, you know, I'm going to wear my heart on the sleeve that my friends who know me know this. It was a very difficult thing to do, to strike the balance, because we all have conscious or unconscious biases, you know. And during all of this time working on this, I mean, taking my first, you know, chapter, I mean, looking at these things, you know, if I put my musicologist or scholarly hat on, I think, God, this is just total trash. I mean, how could they do this? How could serious people get away with this? But on the other hand, you know, I would find myself, I was really enjoying this music, enjoying because viscerally it was bringing something back. And sometimes I was getting nostalgic, and, you know, my husband would walk in, who's also an academic, and would say, okay, you can't just cry and sing your heart out to this. Now take a step back, you know, revisit this, because there is a huge, you know, emotional investment in this music, what we work on. So I had to really work very hard, you know, in striking that balance, both writing as an author myself on my chapter, but also with everybody else's chapters, you know, where you felt there was too much pull, you know. So we had to constantly work in allowing people. We didn't know that people were going to be, you know, that this was going to be the overall narrative, which I think is quite sympathetic, you know, critical, but sympathetic to the Yugoslav project as a whole, you know, but different authors differently. And we tried very hard for any narratives that emerged, if they were critical, to actually allow them to speak. So for instance, if you take mine and Tom's chapters, we're looking at very similar music. He's looking at Slovenian perspective, I'm looking predominantly Zagreb, Belgrade axis, you know, but they're almost polar opposite, not polar opposite, you know, we both have critical voices, but they show two different ways of looking, pretty much same debates in dealing with music and approaches. Žikić, maybe if you add him as a third, looking at that particular, you know, similar repertoire, again, another perspective. And that, I guess, is something we wanted to say. There was not one single narrative on any aspect. And I think this is something, you know, we try to do with our students and say, there is always going to be more than one perspective on whatever you work on, you know. So, and, you know, at first you might have a tendency of saying, oh, well, that's not, you know, that's not right, or that's not all we have here. But we worked very hard as editors to actually allow those contrary narratives to coexist, because we felt this was really important, that there was going to be some credibility and weight to our project, whilst underpinned by certain inescapable nostalgia, just because each one of the authors did this themselves. We had to also allow those critical voices to speak and spar, to you know, and we felt there was responsibility for people who are going to read this, for students, but also hopefully readership back home. Yeah, back home or in former, you know, Yugoslavia, in that space, to see that. And I hope we've done this. But some people were very, very defensive. And I remember we had a difficulty actually in the editorial process and in a peer review about the word Macedonia. And we had our Macedonian scholar who really, we had to work very hard over and over and over to tweak the explanation of the country and the legacy, you know. So some people were, I would say, much more Yugo-nostalgic in certain way of writing, you know, that we as editors had to then negotiate between what our authors wanted to do, what we felt was some measure in between, and then perhaps even more unrealistic demands by series editors, plus then the peer reviewers. So, you know, there's a hierarchy of how this process goes. And I think this is also an important advice, to be prepared to negotiate whatever you work on, you know. So sometimes when you know something is important to you, negotiate and be firm as an author, but always be willing to negotiate. That's the best advice I think I can give to our authors and young scholars.
Yeah. Also a question for Jelka and Marko. Do you think so your personal opinion, do you think that enough time has passed, almost 3 decades since Yugoslavia broke up, so that now we can have a necessary distance and, maybe assess the things more objectively than, when everything was still boiling, boiling up and exploding? And also, how do you perceive the work of young scholars who don't even remember Yugoslavia, who were maybe born afterwards? How do they approach this phenomenon of the country that is no more? And what sort of impact can they make with their own perspective?
If I may first, just to mention shortly that last semester, last year, the whole year, my colleague from Music Academy, Mojca Piškor, and I, in our popular music course, did a thematic stream on Yugo nostalgia and music, and we didn't know what to expect from the students who were born in the late 90s, or some of them even in the early 2000s, which is, it is hard to grasp that there are people born in the 21st century who are already in their studies. And we had, of course, very different responses from them concerning their knowledge and their preconceptions. We had a couple of what Svetlana Boym calls a second-hand nostalgias, people who inherited their nostalgia from parents or even grandparents. We had like skeptics. We had people who were completely ignorant about any music from Yugoslavia or the whole cultural and popular cultural context. So yes, we had to deal with these different levels of knowledge and address it in the beginning of the semester.
Yeah, Marko, historians always deal with dissoluted empires, countries, remnants of past civilizations, and so on and so forth. But is it a bit more difficult assessing Yugoslavia as a historian than as a musicologist, ethnomusicologist, popular music scholar, something like that? So what sort of gravitas does history have, and how do you balance out these things?
Actually, I don't know. I don't think so, actually. I think that by now we all know that, like, the scientific narrative, what we write is a kind of construction, and that our personal experience, all of this, like, family values, they all are embedded into that. So it's, I don't think there is a much difference between a historian, someone who has, like, whose academic background is history or musicology, when they approach some past topics, especially, even if it's so full of emotions like Yugoslavia. Coming back to what you asked about the young generation in Yugoslavia and their view, just a short interlude. I was invited by Jelka and Mojca to have a small lecture on the academy, and I was actually asking the students not precisely about Yugoslav music, but how they approach music, and I realized it's a completely different worldview than ours. So I'm very enthusiastic. I think they can bring a fresh perspective. When I say fresh perspective, is coming back to the topic of my chapter. They don't have these tribes, like, okay, if you are there, for instance, me growing up in Zagreb in the 80s and the 90s, like, folk music was not allowed. Like, you were not even allowed to say that appreciate. And for me, I started to like this music only in my 30s, and because I was really, it was totally different context. And I think the younger generation don't have these boundaries which were put onto them artificially. And another thing which I hope, and I really think, especially because the material is so big and so rich, and I really think that although this will for sure be a canon, I really think there is so many kind of new edited volumes that can come about. For instance, I could totally see an edited volume on Yugoslav music videos. Yeah, it's a huge topic where because if you start from the television and, like, the first videos on television and end up in the 90s, there is so much material there. And what I wanted to say is, hopefully the young generation will bridge the gap which I, as an outsider, see in popular music studies in Yugoslavia, but also, for instance, my edited book now is on peripheral disco scenes in the world. And what I see, and this is really a niche, so what I see is that on one side, you have people in the know, so to say. So, for instance, the rock journalists like Vrdoljak and Glavan. Okay, yeah. Or Glavan is maybe not the best example because he was academic as well. So, who know their stuff, who live there, and then you have academics who know how to write, but don't necessarily have the knowledge or the inside things. And I think like with the young generation, the gap is not going to be as evident as it was.
Yeah, and I think it is also important what Danijela said. So you can be both an scholar and a fanboy. These two things do not have to exclude each other as long as you know, as long as you have the awareness, are you writing from a fanboy perspective or from a scholar's perspective, and how you intertwine these two. And I think it's also beneficial for these millennials, new generations, because they have YouTube. So now they have access to such a variety of musics, not just from Yugoslavia, but from everywhere else in the world. You know that I guess their musical taste is bound to be eclectic, simply because they have access to so many things that were actually hard to come by at the times when we only had to rely on radio or television or cassettes, that sort of thing. So I guess that's one of the good things of the digital era, you know, the instant availability of material that you can work with. I would now, since we need to wrap up this very soon, I would just invite Bojana to show again the table of contents, if someone joined in a bit later, just to get familiar with the list of authors and the list of topics in this volume. Thank you. And maybe Danijela could give a few closing words of advice to anyone who perhaps has an ambition or a desire to edit a volume of this kind. So what are the main challenges? What are, you've already mentioned some of them as well, but how to best approach a project of this scope and which carries such a huge responsibility to get it right?
Yeah, so advice, if you're thinking of doing something like this, don't. No, I'm joking. No.
How many years did you have to commit to this?
Actually, this really probably started as early in 2015, I think, and maybe
I think about
2016. Years. Yeah, but there were a few other, there were a few breaks here and there, and because there are so many authors, that's another thing. So again, it was great, and I stand by it. I think editing a smaller volume or different volume with less authors would be easier. Because at one point, this was not the only project. So I was editing this and co-editing this. So not just editing, but co-editing. So you have to work with each author at times 10, let's say 10 simultaneously are sending different drafts. You have to keep on top of this work that you have to exchange with your co-editor views, ideas before you do this. And you might have some other projects on, but alone, teaching other commitments. So in that sense, just keeping tabs on a lot of people is challenging. And like Marko said, and also because there'll be different degrees of how sensitive people are about the work. And I think as an editor, it's so important for you to be sensitive to that. From a more practical perspective, I think if you think of doing something like this, you have to be uber organized. And you also have to, I think, realize that you can't have, you can start with projections, but it doesn't, the timetable never works out. So when you may scatter different...
Especially when you had a baby during the process of...
And I had a baby, yeah. And there we go. It didn't take any time and effort, but... No. Yeah. Actually, that was the best thing that happened to me because it just spurred the project into being finished before I had the baby. So, there's no deadline like a baby. I mean, I think so in that sense, if you think of doing something, I would also say, just go for it would be another thing. Because I've spent a long time, umming and ahhing about different things and always questioning, is it good enough or things like this. And now going back to myself, I wouldn't be as perfectionist as I am. So the idea of actually just biting a bullet and doing, and the worst thing that can happen then I say no, most likely what they're going to say yes. And I would also say just have critical friends as readers. This has been the best advice for me, and I think, you know, we all think that. But, you know, whatever project, because when you say, how do you strike a balance between being a fan and a scholar? I think by having critical friend readers, you know, colleagues who can actually sometimes check you in and say, oh, you know, this and that. So in that sense, but if there is an idea, I don't think it's not worth exploring, you know, where it may end. You know, who would have known this? Because initially when we submitted the proposal, they asked us for an extra document that would justify the very name Yugoslavia, you know. And we thought, oh dear, this is not boding very well. You know, let's try, but we'll see. But, you know, it wasn't a great thing. You think we haven't even got through the door. We don't know what's going to happen, you know. But I think it's worked out. But I would say in terms of practical advice, and also I think to remember that you can get the most fantastic publishers, and it's great to have those. We've had fantastic support, and there have been a few things that needed legal help. And in that sense, having a giant like Routledge or CUP, you know, it's great because you've got a host of people that can look after things, that can advise you, that can do things on your behalf. So in terms of support, and I'm hoping that the marketing, you know, it's very difficult with COVID now, that will help. But also to remember that even though they do a lot, you can't ever relax and say, oh, I'll just let them look after it. Because we had some glitches in the production process, you know, and some things that if we were not really on the ball and really doing things once it was, you know, manuscript was outsourced, if we didn't, you know, really closely look through everything, it would have been, I don't want to go into details, but it would have been an utter disaster, you know. So in that sense, just the importance, you know, thinking, okay, I may get a contract with, I don't know, CUP, OUP, you know, Routledge or whoever, but still to remember that, you know, you want to work at the best that you can till the very end. That's the advice in terms of practicalities.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Danijela and Marko and Jelka. Thank you, Bojana, and the organizers of the conference, Young Musicology, for giving us space, virtual space, to present this book. I do hope that it is going to be a bestseller, and it will have many re-editions and, you know, just be something that we can all be proud of many, many years down the line. And I wish you all a lot of success in all your future projects. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bojana.